I made my first loaf of bread the other day. It was something I'd been promising myself I'd do for some time, indeed for many years, but somehow the time never seemed right, or it didn't seem to be available. But last Monday I finally got my hands in flour and dough. I followed the recipe, and it worked. It was even good enough to eat, so much so that I had to make another last night. A slightly different recipe, and this time a round one instead of a loaf. This one is disappearing even faster. By pure coincidence, when I notified my scattered family of this new skill, it turned out that my 14-year-old granddaughter had just made her first Irish brown bread a day or so ago. Now, she's already an accomplished baker, and her cakes and her cookies were always wonderful treats when we visited in Australia in recent years. They've just come back to Ireland, and hence the experiment with Irish brown bread. And from America came the news, and a picture, that our 6-year-old grandson had just made his first soda bread. Must be something in the air, or in the environment we find ourselves in at the moment, a 70 years plus spread in our family learning new culinary skills. Anyway, I'm pretty chuffed with myself. Not just about making bread. After all, people have been doing that for many thousands of years. But at finally getting down to it. There's a lot to this bread stuff. I always liked it, of course, but only recently, as I researched, did I realize the complexities of styles, of tastes, of ingredients, and of the processes involved. Also, how pervasive it is in social, political, and religious practice. In every country, continent, and community where bread is made and consumed, it is also symbolic, whether in the Christian body of Christ way, or the welcoming with bread and salt tradition in Ukraine, and the harvest festivals in many cultures which also feature bread strongly. Being the analytical and curious type, I looked at the costs, and I worked out that it isn't necessarily much cheaper to make your own. But that's not the point, is it? It's that extraordinary sense of satisfaction a few days ago when I tipped out my first loaf, tapped the bottom as directed, and deemed it done. And then there's the taste. It was a simple yeast loaf, but somehow tasted so substantially better than the nicely wrapped, long-lasting slicer from old Mr. Brennan. The taste also brought me back to my childhood, when my mother would send me down to Jim O'Connell's bakery in Kilcullen. The order was 2 fresh-baked batch loaves for the family tea. He'd wrapped them in soft brown tissue paper, but by the time I had walked up the town, one of them would already be half devoured. I'm sure I'm not the only child of the time who dug into the 4 white sides of the batch while bringing it home. I'm sure, too, that I wasn't the only one to be scolded for it, but when I look back, I figure it was the reason I was always sent for 2 loaves. That offered the chance that there'd be something for the others when I got back.